Good morning. We are live in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Good morning. It's March 17th. Welcome to the Transportation and Environment Committee. Today we are taking up a number of CIP amendments recommended by the County Executive back in January as part of the FY26 capital budget and amendments for the FY25 to 30 CIP. The CIP amendments involve environmental related areas including recycling and resource management, storm drains, stormwater management, WSSC, and the approved 6-year spending total across all the CIP programs is approximately $376 million. And these expenditures are funded with special fund dollars from the Solid Waste Disposal Fund for recycling and resource management and the Water Quality Protection Fund for the storm drains and storm water management CIPs. And the county executive's amendments would add about $11.2 million in expenditures for a 6-year total of $387 million. And before we get into some of these areas, I do want to note that we received the county executive's budget on Friday. And with regard to the recycling and resource management CIP, they are two different discussions. And so today we are taking up the CIP as part of the 6-year CIP, not the operating budget. That will come through this committee in due time as we take up the FY27 budget in a month or so. But right now we are taking up this interim CIP amendment schedule, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Levchenko to walk us through the packet.
Yeah, our first item is recycling resource management. And the amendments we're looking at today are the ones that came over in January as part of the executive's full amendment package in an off year of the CIP. As you mentioned, the operating budget came out late last week. There were also CIP amendments that the executive recommended last week as well, which we've not had time, obviously, to turn around. Those will be discussed later. And as you mentioned, there's a significant project in the RRM CIP that came over late last week, and we'll be discussing that separately as well. So today, we're talking about two amendments within the recycling resource management CIP that came over. One is the Oaks Landfill Leachate Pretreatment Project, and another is the full upgrade of the existing recycling center complex. And we have DEP staff and OMB staff here today that can provide a brief update on those amendments. I have a couple of slides we'll bring up, and then we can talk through those. So I will do that right now. So I'll turn it over to DEP staff to briefly talk about these two amendments.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Jamie Foster. I'm the section chief of the Planning, Design, Construction, and Monitoring section in the Resource and Recycling Management Division. So I put together a few slides to give an update on these two CIP projects. Next slide, please. So this is for the Oaks Landfill Leachate Pretreatment Plant. So we are in the process of retrofitting this plant. Most of the retrofitting is to address PFAS, which is considered forever chemicals. There are new state and federal regulations that are being promulgated in order to address these forever chemicals. So we're working to use the amended funding to develop some treatment technologies that will work that we could install in the treatment plant in order to mitigate PFAS from the effluent that we use to discharge into WSSC's sanitary sewer system. So the funding that we are requesting will actually help us continue the evaluation of figuring out what type of treatment system that we'll need. We started the evaluation and we started it with a granular activated carbon system, and we did benchmark sampling to figure out if our effluent will effectively be treated but based on the testing, we realized that we would not meet the 4 parts per trillion treatment goal. So we're moving on to other treatment technologies to try to address this situation. So that's the update on the Oaks. Next, any questions?
Colleagues? No?
All
More
right,
questions?
awesome. Next slide. And so this is an update on the materials recovery facility, the MRF upgrades project. There was a slight delay in order to conduct a facility conditions assessment. We needed to do that assessment to understand the actual facility conditions in order to expand the basis of design, not only to install processing equipment, but also to do building modifications that would help accommodate the new processing equipment that we're planning to install as part of this project. So we've completed the facility condition assessment. We're now in the 30% basis of design. We received that on Friday. I'm currently reviewing that, and I have a meeting today at 1 p.m. with the contractors to figure out the next path forward.
Okay, so let's go, since you're ticking through them all, let's just go back with to the Oaks landfill, and no objection, so we'll support the county executive's recommendation there. Now to the MRF. Councilmember Balcom, didn't look like you had a comment.
Yes, I do. So thank you, and this certainly makes sense. We're going to launch into a discussion about just the waste system in total soon. Do you anticipate any changes in this facility based on the way that we do solid waste in the county?
We conducted, do you want to take it? Okay, sure.
Good morning, Willie Weiner. I'm the chief of the area department. No, we continue with the same recycling program for our commingle facility. So there will be no changes on that. We're going to continue bringing in basically the same amount of tonnage that we're bringing today, about between 33,000 tons of material, and we're basically collecting from countywide right now. So that's not we're not planning to change that portion of the business.
Okay, thank you.
And Councilmember Balcom alluded to a conversation that we will have that I teed up in my opening remarks during the operating budget. I was going to say, look forward to that discussion. It will be a tough discussion that we have before us, but one that we have to tackle. So, Mr. Weiner, do you want to keep going? Are you good? Okay. The one question I have is regarding the new equipment that's needed for this facility. Talk about the value of that investment, going from whatever our current capacity is to new capacity.
So currently, in the design phase, we are evaluating different technologies, including artificial intelligence, that may help with processing equipment to be more innovative in terms of how to increase capacity. As the county grows, recycling is going to grow, so we want to make certain that when we install this processing equipment, that we do it in a way that it enables the county to also accommodate future capacity. So, at this point, we don't have any definitive specifications on the actual processing equipment, but once we get to the 60% design phase, then we'll have more information in terms of what the actual processing equipment will look like. We just conducted a sort study at the MRF to figure out what type of recyclables we receive there, so then that way, as we proceed through the basis of design, we make certain that the design phases accommodate and also include the data that we received from that sort of study.
In looking through the packet and reading other literature, is it an expectation or a hope that capacity is able to be increased nearly threefold? Is that a goal?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, let me answer that. So the current equipment, as was described before, was installed back in the 90s, early 90s. It was upgraded in 2001, and it can only process about 8 tons per hour of material. That's less than the incoming material that is coming right now. So we are forced to bypass a portion of that material to other processing facilities. So the facility that we are looking for right now as an upgrade will be processing about 22 to 25 tons an hour, which is, yes,
Almost
three
threefold,
times
yeah.
what the current one can process.
I think it's important to frame it that way so that people understand what the investments and what the goals are working toward, and a threefold collection effort is something I think everybody would support. So I support this, colleagues, yes? Okay, we all support this. Yeah, please, Council President.
Before we leave this, I thank the chair for teeing up that we're going to have a broader conversation on this issue, but I think, Ms. Silichenko, this might be a question for you, because I know at the beginning of the packet, you note that the expenditures that we just talked about for these two projects are funded through the Solid Waste Disposal Fund, current revenue, and revenue bonds with the debt service paid with the Solid Waste Disposal Fund current revenue. We did receive from the county executive in his proposed budget a rather ambitious increase in the solid waste management fee. Is that increase that he proposed for the upcoming fiscal year impact any of the decisions that we're making on this CIP?
Well, the executive's recommendation would accommodate these from January and also accommodate his recommendations that came over late last week, both on the operating budget, which had increases as well, but also on the CIP, which has the new treatment process project with a lot of planning work that is current revenue. So all of that is built into the rates that the executive has transmitted to the council. Now, the council, as you know, will have to go through all of this and decide what rates, based on those projects and what it wants to do, what are the appropriate rates to approve, and the council will have basically till mid-May to make that decision.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify that because I think it's an important piece as we're working through all this to understand how all these things are interrelated.
Yeah, thank you. So would these projects alone trigger a fee increase?
That's something we can ask DEP to come back with in terms of what are the rate or the fee implications from different scenarios.
Yeah.
You know, if you were to defer the new project, for instance, that came over, what would that have the impact? What about the other issues we've talked about, including, for instance, the spending to extend the life cycle of the RRF? That's also current revenue, so that impacts the rates in FY26 as well. So it's all part of the same package. And
Yeah, I think that would be good to know, because we certainly all agree that these projects that we're looking at this morning today are important. So I think we just need to know as we go along, and I know that the decisions of fees are made at a different point in time. So I think it's, as we make those decisions, I think it would be great to know just the impact, revenue impact of each, fee impact of each of those.
I think these two projects, which are both ongoing projects, well justified in the past, the council's approved them, and the executive's recommended changes this year. Staff feels basically we need to do these to move forward, both with the regulatory side for the Oaks project and also the criticality of the MRF in terms of capacity, as well as upgrading the processing ability of it. So regardless, I think, of where we may be on some of the bigger picture items in terms of waste disposal, I think these projects need to move forward. And so staff's comfortable today with the committee taking these up. As you said, we have a lot of other work to do on the bigger picture items going forward.
I appreciate the questions, and let me ask the same question a different way. Are these investments predicated on the fee increases that the county executive just proposed?
Well, as I mentioned, these today have a much more marginal impact on rates. They're much smaller in impact than what we're seeing in terms of the operating budget changes and the new capital project that's recommended was recommended March 14th. So I imagine, and we have to get the numbers from DEP and OMB, but I imagine these projects alone are not driving a significant impact on rates.
There's an interplay, of course, right? But it's not the driving factor. I understand that. And I'm seeing DEP nod in agreeing with that. Okay.
I just think it would be helpful maybe if we formally asked from the T&E committee to get that breakdown on projects, and especially since we just got a whole bunch of CIP amendments on Friday, because there are so many things that are in motion with this budget this year. And so having from DEP as soon as possible, a clear breakdown on the fee increase and what that projects it goes towards, and even having conversations about prioritization sooner rather than later, I think would be very helpful.
I think that's a great request. Great. Thank you. Okay, so right now we support and understand the goal. We will learn more information to see how it all interplays with the larger waste management proposal. And this committee will be taking up the waste management plan next week or in 2 weeks' time.
Actually, yeah. We do have the solid waste management plan coming up for discussion next week. Now, that's not specific to the budget per se, but obviously the policy issues associated with it are, cut across all of these budget areas. And then more importantly, regarding the budget itself, we'll have the operating budget discussion in April and the follow-up CIP discussion on things that are not before the committee today.
That's right. An ongoing conversation that DEP is clearly excited about. I see it. Good. Okay, so moving on from the recycling and waste management, we'll move over to storm drains. Thank you, DP.
All right, yeah. With regard to storm drains, which I purposely chose first before stormwater management, we actually have just one project for amendment, and it's really a correction to address what reality going forward. So with regard, this is regarding the facility planning project on storm drains, and it has the impact of accelerating some dollars that have already been appropriated, and DOT staff can talk about the specifics of that, but there's no substantive impact on the CIP in terms of scope, timing of any projects. This is really more housekeeping to just get the project in line with what's actually happening. And I'll turn it over to DOT staff.
Good morning, Emma Glenn, Deputy Director of DOT. On the storm drain facility planning, some work was occurring right at the cusp of the fiscal year. Some of those dollars in that project were charged to the earlier fiscal year, so it accelerated some of the work. Our staff often get that 2-year appropriation, and so they're trying to tee up the work that will then be constructed in storm drain general project in the second part of the period.
So staff is comfortable with I would call it a technical amendment to just correct or reflect reality. There's one other project that I've noted in the packet. It doesn't require action or recommendation by the committee, but it has to do with the follow-up on the River Falls Storm Drain Improvements Project. This is one that's in the planning, and the committee and the council had included language in the project description form for DOT to come back at a later time when the project is fully developed. Partly because it's got significant costs associated with it if it moves forward under your current assumptions, but also because it's in some ways a precursor to other projects we'll be seeing coming out of the flood management plan. We'll be talking more about that with DEP. But this project is intended to deal with localized flooding issues in this particular area, and there's all sorts of different solutions they're looking at. And that will help inform perhaps how other parts of the county are dealt with. as well going forward. Now, we don't have there's no amendment today per se, but I just want to alert the committee that we'll be seeing this come back probably in the fall for discussion.
I know this is an area that doesn't get as much attention as other areas of the CIP, but as we continue experiencing more flooding and more increased precipitation and rainfall, it is something that we need to continue investing in and making sure that we have the resources in probably more parts of the county moving forward. Mr. Wallalen, where within the county, if you're able to speak about it, are there areas that we are looking towards in the next few years that might need more support?
So I believe DEP is doing more of a comprehensive management and prioritizing certain areas. We're looking at more of the localized flooding, particularly within a particular community instead of the entire watershed. So I think they would be able to speak to those larger issues. This is the only one that we have on tap and in the pipeline right now for specific solutions like that. That was studied as part of a grant.
Great. Thank you for that. And we'll get into stormwater management next. So thank you for teeing that up. Without objection, we'll support that amendment. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, next up, we do have stormwater management.
Yep.
The DEP folks come up, and they do actually have a brief presentation we can turn to. But I think first we can go through the amendments that are before us today, and then the presentation will be helpful for follow-up questions and some of the discussion you just had. And this actually is the same packet. If you're looking through your notes, I combined the storm drains and the stormwater management packet in one because they are so interlinked. There's a lot of coordination between DEP and DOT on this work. Obviously, the storm drain work tends to focus on flooding issues. DEP has to focus not just on quantity, but also quality issues as well, and meeting its stormwater management permit. And as you mentioned, we have this flood management plan that's been moving forward for planning work, and we've had placeholder dollars put in the CIP to provide what we expect to be work that will be generated from that planning work. But we do have a couple of specific CIP amendments for today. First, I did want to mention we have the stormwater management retrofit county-wide project, and the county executive is recommending an increase in there to add 3 new upstream mitigation projects. And they're discussed briefly in the packet. Let me see if I can find that page number. Oh yeah, page 9 of the packet. There's a few projects, including some stormwater management bioretention work for the proposed Loderman Middle School outdoor classroom, design and construction of 4 congregations for clean water biodetention projects. That's a nonprofit partnership, and also money for the Green Vest reforestation project. And DEP can speak to each of those perhaps now real quick before we move on.
Great. Thank you.
Morning, Amy Stevens, Division Chief for Watershed Restoration Division. These projects are, like Keith mentioned, they're all upland work. They're bioretention. They're located in the Rock Creek and Anacostia watersheds. They're small projects, but they're going to do the treatment that we need in those watersheds upstream of a lot of the work in the streams. And so we wanted to push them forward and advance them for this funding year.
I just want to say thank you, because clearly you heard what we were sharing last year about the need to do more upstream water collection, and these 3 projects, as you noted, might be small, but you did make those changes based on the feedback that we provided, which was after deep consultation with members of the community. And thank you. Great. Do you want to, while you're here, you want to just provide a little more context about what those 3 projects are?
Sure, absolutely. So the Clean Water Congregations for Clean Water is a partnership with congregations to do small scale projects on their property. We do it in conjunction with all of our other projects like Tree Montgomery. So we're doing a project at Temple Emmanuel. It's estimated to be completed in 2027. We have one right now at St. Stephen Lutheran Church. And then we have two more that we're still working through. We're adding the Loitering Middle School's an outdoor classroom in Rock Creek. They're doing a great, this part of the Reach Hub, if you're familiar with that. And then the reforestation project is one where we found some acreage that could be reforested in Greenvest. One of our pay for performance contractors brought the project to our attention and we wanted to move forward with it.
Great. Sounds promising. And while we're talking about amendments for this existing CIP, look forward to next year's conversation when hopefully there'll be some more upstream projects added to that. So without objection, we will accept that. Thank you.
And just bear with me for a moment. We're going to queue up a presentation on the flood management plan. So the DEP can do that.
That's the same proposal that's in the packet on
Yeah,
Circle 12.
there are two amendments. Basically, they have an increase in the planning work needed to fully assess all of the watersheds, but they're able to take a little bit out of the placeholder project to offset most of that. So both projects are being amended, but really the focus should be on the planning aspect of this right now, since nothing's moved forward on the implementation side. Yeah, that's okay too. Okay, we have it up. So Stan, you want to walk through the slides? I'll advance them as you ask.
Sure. Good morning. I'm Stan Edwards. I'm the Chief of the Division of Energy, Climate and Compliance in DEP, and helping to lead the development of the Comprehensive Flood Management Plan. I'll give you just an update on where we are now. We're making good progress. So some of these slides you've seen before. So again, the three key objectives of the plan are to do an engineering study of the watersheds that we assessed in phase one of the project to understand where we're vulnerable to flooding risk in the future, particularly with climate change. We want to, based on that information, want to understand how to modify counties' programs, policies, regulations around development and building codes to address that flooding risk. And finally, we want to make sure we're addressing racial equity and social justice and the identification of those programs and policies. Next slide, please, Keith. As I've mentioned before, this is a multi-department effort. There are 6 key agencies here, and as well as representatives from the county executive's office involved in this. All these entities have some involvement in flooding, whether it's reviewing development, approving development, addressing flooding concerns. We heard about storm drains with DOT, or recovering from flooding in the case of emergency management. Next slide. There are 3 phases to this. Phase one's been completed. That's where we were identifying the watersheds that we wanted to do the detailed studies on. And we started a review of our programs and policies now so we could get a basis for moving forward. We're in phase 2 right now, doing the detailed assessments of the watersheds, starting in Sligo Creek. That's our pilot watershed. We're almost completed with that one. And we're digging in more detail into the policies and programs that we want to look at to address flooding. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Phase 3 will be implementing projects to address flooding and continuing the work on policies and programs. That will take quite some time to figure out. Some of those are going to be quite controversial, so that will be an ongoing effort. Next slide, please, Keith. So the timeline for the watershed modeling, and I've got this in front of me here, and I can read it better. We're doing 11 watersheds. They should be modeled by the end of 2027. Sligo is our pilot watershed we're doing now. Rock Creek, both Lower and Middle Rock Creek will be done in 25, and the other 8 will be done in 26. The models will show the risk of flooding from 10-year storms up to 500-year storm events. And we're creating models for now, 2050 and then 2100. So we look into the future. A lot of the infrastructure that's being put in, whether it's for stormwater management or buildings, or roadways, lasts a long time. So we'll model out in the future. We've made some updated assumptions about both precipitation and impervious area. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in the future. The next slide, Keith, thank you, shows the details. We're doing about 101,000 acres of watersheds. That's about 157 square miles in the county. The map on the previous slide showed they're mostly in the I-70 corridor up 29, that where you'd expect the most populated areas in the county inside the Beltway. Covers about 670,000 people in the county, so about 2/3 of the county's population. A large percentage of that is in areas with a social vulnerability index greater than 0.5, which again was a factor we considered when determining which watersheds to evaluate. Next slide, please, Keith. Actually, you can go 2 slides. So the first thing we did as part of this work is to update precipitation assumptions. The data that's still being used is by when you're doing stormwater management planning is based on storm gauge data or rain gauge data from the year 2000. It's 25 years out of date. NOAA maybe is updating that to current rain gauge data, so come up to current time, and also projecting into the future. We hope. I don't know the status of the NOAA work now with the new administration. Nonetheless, we went forward with our process using the same analysis techniques that NOAA uses, looking at rain gauge data and taking the most recent modeling for climate change to project increased rainfall. And you can see here, these are the rainfall projections. So on the left is the current baseline 24-hour projection for Rockville, and subsequently are the updated baseline for the 24-hour event for Montgomery County. It's not site specific to Rockville, but for current day 2050 and 2100, you can see the amount of rainfall increases considerably. So focusing on the gold bar there, that's the 100-year storm. Right now it's 8.2 inches in 24 hours. With our updated numbers, it would be 8.4 inches current day, and then going up to 9.7 in 2050 and 11.9 in 2100. So a considerable increase in the amount of rainfall we're projecting to occur, and we want to make sure we factor that in the modeling.
Mr. Edwards, before you move on, can you re-up the coordination and information sharing that the county is receiving from NOAA? What is NOAA providing the county with regards to these efforts?
Yes, we're not getting any support directly from NOAA on this. They do rainfall projections for across the country. So you can go onto the NOAA website right now and get any geographical location and get what they call the IDF curves, the intensity, duration, frequency curves, to find out how much rainfall you would expect in a given storm event. Those were, again, last updated using 2000 rain gauge data. And that's referred to as Atlas 14. They were in the process of doing Atlas 15, which is updating that across the country on a phase schedule. I don't know they were working on that. I don't know the status of that. We'll have to check with NOAA. But we're going beyond what even NOAA was planning on doing, I think, because we're projecting out to 2050 and 2100. So
thank you for elaborating on that. Clearly, we all know the situation that's happening at NOAA, the uncertainty that's there, the certain fact that thousands of people have been laid off, many of whom are Montgomery County residents. But the point here is that NOAA and its staff are helping provide information that we use to prevent catastrophic flooding. Full stop. Just wanted to bring that home and make it relevant to this discussion. So thank you.
On the next slide, another critical part of our analysis was looking at impervious area assumptions. We know we're going to have some growth in the county. There's lots of people working on various discussions about that. So what we did was we did 2 things. One, we looked at what we call the reasonable worst case, based on what we currently see, based on zoning in the county now. So the bar chart on the left, in the R60 zone, for example, in Sligo Creek, we looked at certain areas that are already developed. The most developed R60 areas in the county. And these are just small sections we looked at when we looked at the current development. And we assumed that if those areas in R60 could be developed to that extent, then every other place under current zoning laws could be developed to that. And so that's what we call the reasonable worst case. And so we use that as the 2100 ultimate development that could occur in that zone. And we did that for other zones in the watershed. And then we also looked at focused growth areas around transit corridors, and we increased the amount of impervious area based on what we currently see in very developed transit areas like Silver Spring or Wheaton. And we use that along the metro corridors, along BRT routes, along the Purple Line to increase development and assumed impervious area around metro areas. So that's the way we accounted for increased and impervious area. And all those, obviously, more rainfall, more impervious area means more water runoff. And so that's what we want to factor into the model. So if you can go to the next slide, please. Right now, you can go onto the DPS website and see FEMA floodplains. FEMA just did an update to the floodplains in the county around what they call riverine flooding. So this is Sligo Creek. The blue there is the 100-year expected floodplain for 100-year. The gold is expected for a 500-year storm. Again, this is something we're also curious what's going to happen with FEMA doing this work in the future, but that's a story for another day. But this map right now is what all we know about flooding, the extent of flooding in the county. And this shows how rivers and streams would top their banks in severe storm events. What we're interested in is, and talked a little bit about earlier, about storm drains that can't handle the amount of rainfall. And so go to the next slide, please, Keith. This is an excerpt of our preliminary results for Sligo Creek. And this is what we see when we have storm drains that can't handle the amount of rainfall and channel that water off of neighborhoods and the streets and around buildings. So this is a little snip of our preliminary model of Sligo Creek, and we're close to having a full-scale model of this that we'll be able to provide. You can imagine this is something, one of the things we're working on here is how do we tell this story of what this model shows? Because a model that shows that your neighborhood might be under some water under certain storm conditions would cause some concern for people. And so we want to make sure we're explaining what we're showing here. They fully understand what the map shows. So we refer to as telling the story. We've got a team of people working on telling the story so that when we make this map public, we are making sure people fully understand what they're seeing here. We think it's important to share what the model shows, but we don't want to cause anybody to panic about what that model shows.
Is this image a real image?
This is a real image from our.
Where is it?
It's in Sligo Creek. I'm gonna just leave it at that right now.
I live a few blocks from Sligo Creek, so there we go.
Many
Okay.
people do. You can see that the different color areas on that map indicate depths. So the light blue there is up to half a foot of water. The model shows, and the darker blue, the deeper the water gets. So a half a foot in some places might not be a problem. It could be a problem if you have a basement, if it's on a roadway. If you have a basement-able apartment, we saw that in Rock Creek Woods. So this is important information that we want to share.
And what is the plan to go public with some of this data?
So again, we're working on the being able to make sure we tell the story right, so people understand that, and then we would make this a publicly available tool. It'd be a web-based tool. Anybody can go on the web, look at this tool, zoom into an area, just like we have many maps now. You can go to the zoning map now, and you can look at, what's the zoning of your property. So,
Okay, thank you.
and I expect we'd be releasing this probably this summer sometime. And then as we work on each of the subsequent 10 watersheds, we'll have a map, a model result for each of those
So
watersheds.
starting with Sligo and then working toward the others.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll get to your.
Can you go to the next slide, please? Two down, I guess. So I'm gonna talk about four next steps. One, first one is capital improvement projects. Today, We do have an implementation PDF in the capital budget. Those are placeholder numbers right now, but we don't have projects identified yet. That's the last part of what we're doing is we're doing preliminary identification of projects, which we have to go into more detail design. The cost of those are likely to be significant. And they typically will involve increasing conveyance, increasing storm drain systems, or developing detention facilities that can hold water. At least when the storm abates. So that's the first part. If we won't have enough, I don't think we'll have enough funding to do all the capital projects to address flooding concerns. So there are several other things, number of other things looking at keeping go to the next slide. The first one is we want to look at planning and building codes, the planning process and building codes. In that map I showed you, if a house comes in for a demolition permit to be torn down and rebuilt, and it's in an area that we've identified as at flood risk, I don't think we want to build it the same way we built it before. It should probably have, this is just an example of what some other jurisdictions look at. I think we'll look at is, should the first floor have a base elevation above, minimum amount above the anomaly flood area, for example? Or should they not have a walkout basement? Or if there is a walkout basement, should there be some protection around the basement so that it's in a flood area that flood risk? We accommodate that. Having infrastructure like heating and air conditioning, should that be in a basement or should that be required to deal with certain flood emission, things like that. We also have to figure out how to factor these models into long-term planning and long-range planning and large-scale planning. If we're doing a development, large-scale development, what's the impact of that development going to be on the areas around it? And what should be the obligations of that development to do anything to mitigate flooding? And those are controversial subjects, as you can imagine. Everyone's going to have an opinion on who's responsible for this, who should pay for it.
I appreciate you and the department looking into this. It clearly is a hot topic item with a lot of different thoughts. People have a lot of different thoughts and opinions on it. Having over the last number of years looked into newly rebuilt homes and the parameters thereof, you started by talking about the insides of the building, insides of the home, and how things can be accommodated for what might be outside. But the complaint I hear most often is that when a home is torn down and a new one is rebuilt that is 2 to 3 times the size, taking up 2 to 3 times the impervious surface, or creating that much more impervious surface, there is that much more water runoff. Is the department or the executive branch looking at some of that? Yeah, I mean, I just want to state that a lot of this work and water mitigation is clearly, as you even noted, emphasized in areas where there is more growth. And one of your slides showed that, right? The areas of growth, particularly around Sligo, Wheat, downtown Silver Spring, and people expect the impervious surface there. So we have to make sure the infrastructure is able to carry that water. With this, the newly rebuilt homes, they are not in our traditional urban areas, but the runoff is still great, and it is directly related to the increase in impervious surfaces because of the larger homes. So it is something that is real, it is undeniable, and it's something we try to figure out. I'm glad you're all. be a proactive step, not reactive.
Great, thank you, Mr. Rose, and thank you for this overview. And I know you said that there's probably going to be more released this summer. And I know DEP does a great job of its community outreach, but I think this is really important also to have in multiple languages and think because of how many scams there are out there, quite frankly. Trying to get people to either buy insurance or do things to their homes that aren't legitimate. And so I think coming from the county government in multiple languages will be really helpful information, particularly on the flood insurance piece of it. So thank you for that update.
Good point. I say on my listserv all the time, particularly with WSSC, right? And sewer mains and clogging or repairing that
program, capital programs, and third-way adjustments and so forth. The interjurisdictional agreement, which is basically the fund for reclaim and model one, and then the wastewater collection category, which is the sewer collection system at the pump stations. The category of innovation and investments includes items such as PFAS and the new items, and then water treatment and storage. That covers the water filtration plants, the Buxton and Potomac, and the reservoirs and the elevated water storage tanks. The water resource recovery facilities is another category that covers our 6 water resource recovery facilities. And then the last one is the general facilities, which includes all the buildings that are non-process buildings where our offices are. So I'll go over these categories quickly in the next slide.
What is the breakdown regarding fees collected between the two jurisdictions? What percentage is from Montgomery County versus Prince George's
That I
County?
don't have that on the top of my head. Let me,
Yeah, we can get that information. We don't deal with it regularly because as was mentioned, we have a unified water and sewer district. So everything goes into the pot and then everything gets distributed out based on some of the priorities you heard. I mean, there's other factors as well that most of the wastewater treatment plants are in Prince George's County. This is because of geography and how water flows. So more of their sewage is treated in Prince George's, whereas or the vast amount of Montgomery County sewage is treated at Blue Plains. So that has a factor in terms of where the dollars are going effectively to address the flows from the two jurisdictions. But from WSSC Water's perspective, it is a single unified system that has to be dealt with in a single unified way. Unlike, say, the Park and Planning, which has a bifurcated park system. They have central services that's a pretty small, very small budget, and then their park systems are independent and make independent decisions.
Yes. I understand how the bi-county agency was created and currently operates, and I appreciate, Mr. Levchenko, you equating it to Park and Planning, because I think there are similarities here to talk about more broadly. In advance of our next conversation, presumably during the budget, I would request that we get a breakdown of revenues collected between the two jurisdictions and disbursement between the two jurisdictions. And Mr. Levchenko, you correctly noted, and I think it's an important point, that there are different facilities and the management of the water is different. What I would like to drill down a little bit more on is with regard to the maintenance and building of new mains. I want to see where there are needs to fix aging infrastructure and where we're building new infrastructure, which is different than the facilities and the water treatment itself. And the reason I think now is the time to engage in this, and the fact that we don't have this data readily available, it's important because the two counties have disagreed on a rate. And so by implication, we are forging different paths on how to pay for this infrastructure. And we need to look at how we are paying for this infrastructure and who is paying for this infrastructure, so that if we are on a course where we continue, and I'm not prophesizing here, but if we are on a course where we continue diverging because we all agree that the rates are too high, full stop. And I've spent 2 terms on this committee trying to figure this riddle out, and it is difficult. I understand it. It's almost a Gordian knot, because it is a self-fulfilling prophecy in that water usage continues to decrease, which is a very good thing, but then there's not enough revenue to support the aging infrastructure and the ongoing maintenance. I understand that. But just like Park and Planning has a somewhat different model, even though they too were created by the state, now might be the time to rethink and potentially update our model. I know Chair Corman in Annapolis has thoughts on always trying to make sure that we do better with regard to our state agencies, and I think now might be an inflection point in which we engage in another conversation towards this goal. So just wanted to share that and have that information ready for next series of conversations. Yeah, Councilmember Stewart.
Great, thank you. I have a question which I don't anticipate you have an answer for today, but it's particularly regarding the Blue Plains facility and our sharing that with the District of Columbia. Given the continuing resolution that was passed on Friday, if the bill doesn't pass the House, which provides the District of Columbia to continue with this year's fiscal budget, there may be impacts on the Blue Plains facility. And so keeping us apprised of what that may mean for just not their, the operating, but also as we saw the capital budget moving forward, I think is going to be key as we're looking at the CIP moving forward. So And if you have some thoughts, great,
Yes.
but I know this was, just Friday, so.
Sure, we followed up with them. And the assessment from DC Water, their preliminary assessment was that the federal cuts to the federal dollars will have a minimal impact on them, and that them as DC Water are prepared to absorb the estimated cost they have as of Friday. As far as additional increases to our blue planes or biosolids, they don't anticipate anything happening. But again, we're keeping lockstep with them just to make sure that there's no pass-through cost. But as far as the federal dollars, most of that will impact the city more than DC Water.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for that question, Councilmember Stewart. Looking at the general just source of revenue, while federal state grants is very small comparatively to other revenue sources, there's still an amount of federal funds that come into WSSC. Have you looked at the stability of those funds, if that's at all possible right now?
Yes, with the funds that we currently have and that we had entered into agreement with the agencies with, those are ongoing. They have not been canceled yet, or not yet. They have not been canceled at all. What we're doing is when we are looking at our new sources, we have to take a position of what will happen once the final decisions are made. So we're proactively seeing if we need to identify a different source of revenue to fund those projects. But as of now, there has not been again, just like with DC Water, there hasn't been anything major that we've had to take off the books as far as funding goes as it relates to federal grants.
Thank you. And as stated before, if you could please let us know as soon as possible if you have any impact from federal funds.
We will.
Thank you.
Great, Commissioner Levchenko.
Yeah, I did want to touch on some of the mechanics of the budget this year. And you heard in the presentation, there are several big new projects in this CIP you heard today, including the major master planning effort that was discussed. Right now, those are placeholder dollars, assuming that they will identify the most important assets and needs and fill those. They also have the lead abatement project. We had a briefing on that last fall, along with PFAS. We had both of those were discussed, as well as the smart meters. Those all were discussed last fall at this committee. They all have funding in this CIP. And the lead abatement there's always been some money in there, but now we have a very significant initiative that's moving forward in the CIP. PFAS, similar, although a lot of that is still, being developed in terms of planning work. And the smart meters, I think, is important to note. That's actually not a separate project, but it's in an other capital programs umbrella project. And for years, the commission had held off on moving forward on that. Frankly, they just had a lot of other bigger issues to deal with the pandemic and a lot of the fallout from that. And there is a significant cost associated upfront with the smart meter approach. But they are looking to move forward with that in terms of further planning work to figure out a solution going forward. So that money is also in the CIP going forward.
And I'll just note also that there is now support from this committee and from the council to move forward with smart metering, which was not always the case. Recognizing when people contact us absolutely alarmed, legitimately alarmed about their bill, it's because there was no notification system built in because of the age of our infrastructure. So now we can update so that our residents are not alarmed when something happens.
Right. I mean, one of the benefits certainly of smart meters is near real-time access to data, and you can drive notifications out to residents where they see unusual water use. So you get the issue that you're talking about,
Exactly.
of not having a 90-day delay with a leak or something like that. That certainly can contribute to the unexpectedly large bills. There's also a lot of other system-related benefits to that as well. But it would be a very significant infrastructure project because the vast majority of WSSC Water's meters are old and not smart meters. So there's a very significant replacement process that has to happen. And by the way, newer meters tend to read more accurately than old meters. and they tend to read, by more accurately, they read higher. So you will also see increases in bills from that. And I don't think the residents will recognize that they were subsidized for a long time on the old meters. They will see the bigger bill. So that's also something that will require a significant outreach component, as if and when these meters do get distributed, we could see that residual impact of customers getting a more accurate bill, but also an initially higher bill. But I did want to note, those are several major initiatives in the CIP. But the CIP itself is not going up a lot, as you noted as you'll see in the packet. But that's because they are resetting several of these other projects, the reconstruction projects. They're setting those basically at levels where they have been able to accomplish over the last few years. Before there was a significant completion factor built in, much below, I think it was 70% for the reconstruction projects. So they would be budgeted at 100, completion factor at 70. And so the debt service associated with that was at the 70, not at the 100. But the budget was shown at 100. Now they're eliminating the completion factor, assuming to get closer to the 100 on those by doing more realistic levels of work, and shifting those dollars that had been reserved in those projects to these newer projects we just mentioned. So we'll get a better sense of if all of that budgeting pans out the way we think it will, but that's the assumption going into the 26 through 31 CIP. So the overall 6-year increase, it's basically flat, but you have those new initiatives on one end, and you have these other projects that have been reset to offset most of that.
Not to mix apples and oranges, but for the council's perspective, the resetting of the CIP and the spending, is that akin to what we used to do with regard to MCPS, and now we've updated our budgeting a little bit?
Well, with the MCPS CIP, I think it was more of a shifting in priorities away from new capacity, more to regular infrastructure upgrade. WC's been in the infrastructure upgrade business now for a long time, and we've increased those projects tremendous amount over the past 15 years. And so now they're taking a step back to say, where are we now? What are appropriate levels of spending in those various projects? They do have new technologies to better target their spending in the reconstruction projects. So that's part of this master planning effort, is identifying where those next dollars need to be spent. But importantly, those dollars are in the CIP. They are placeholders, but they are built into the long-range financial plan too. The idea is to try to come up with a financial plan, hopefully by the end of this budget process, the two councils will agree, that can give us guidance going forward, not just in the next year, but for the next 6 years.
Understood. What I was trying to discern was the difference between truth in budgeting and reallocation of budget priorities. So I think you've explained it, but we'll continue this conversation.
And also, I've noted in the packet a number of items that I've suggested for follow-up by the committee. Those are at the very beginning of the packet. I mentioned the long-range financial plan. That's something that we talk a lot more about on the operating side, because that's the later discussion. And that is something that we will want the two councils. We don't approve operating budgets beyond the first year, obviously. The councils are not committed to years 2 through 6, but we would like the councils to be comfortable with the long-range plan that they are assuming as they approve FY26. That would be a goal going forward, so that we don't have a lot of divergence during the spending control limits process in the fall, that we try to come to some reasonable baseline of agreement in the operating budget process that carries over to the next spending control limits process. So that's part of that. Also, there are a number of other initiatives. The metering infrastructure I mentioned earlier, I think the council will want to better understand where that is heading. That's still a bit in its infancy right now in terms of being redone at WSSC Water. So I think that's something the committee will want to hear about. Also, we have a lot of communities within the planned sewer service area that are not currently served and are facing significant financial issues to get service because of the cost issues associated with extensions. a task force, an interagency work group, looked at this issue for some years, but we have not been able to make progress on that. I think it is important for that issue not to be lost going forward. Also, regionally, we do have water resiliency issues that have come up at the Council of Governments. WSSC Water participates in that. I expect that may be something that comes up after budget as well. Once again, there's a very significant federal component to that, since the District of Columbia is most reliant on this kind of water resiliency. Fortunately, with WSSC Water, we do have multiple water sources, and we're in a little bit better shape in that regard. But as a region, and I think COG is the appropriate place to organize this, and they have been. I expect that there could be some movement on that over time, and we need to stay up to date on that. And then WSSC Water also does have an ambitious greenhouse gas reduction program that's noted in both their CIP and their operating budget, and that may be an area that the committee will want to revisit as well going forward.
Thank you for the in-depth conversation. Look forward to receiving some of that additional information when we take up the operating budget. Presumably that'll be the right time to talk about some of it, noting there's a difference between CIP and operating, but the overarching goal I want to talk about is about the rate increases and the diverging paths that the two counties might be on and how we mitigate that. So that's the overarching message there. Not seeing any other comments. Without objection, we'll support WSSC CIP.
And as you know, we will have the operating budget discussion in April. So everything is preliminary today.
Yep.
And maybe revisited as we get closer to our bi-county meeting in early May, where we work to come to agreement on rates, operating budget, and CIP with Prince George's Council.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Levchenko, for the packet. Thank you to my colleagues. Thank you to everybody else. Good day for infrastructure